Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Mooney, and I am the project lead of the Community Knowledge Program at Wellesley Institute. We'd like to welcome you to our panel discussion today on building and sustaining research partnerships. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the Wellesley Institute operates. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from all over Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We'd also like to take a moment of silence for the victims of the unimaginable disaster in Syria and Turkey. At last count, there were 11,200 souls lost, and the toll will continue to rise. So let's just take a moment to think of them. Welcome to our second panel for this series. The Community Knowledge Program aims to encourage collaborative research and knowledge sharing within the immigrant and refugee serving sector in the Greater Toronto Area. We work to fill existing gaps in how researchers, policymakers, and community agencies work together to conduct research and apply its findings to frontline work with newcomers. We conducted a needs assessment in 2021 to understand these gaps. One way that we are addressing them is through panel discussions, such as the one today, to convene leaders from different parts of the sector to speak about their experiences and perspectives on research and knowledge mobilization. Since the Community Knowledge Program came to Wellesley Institute, we've held panel discussions on a variety of topics. We've looked at misinformation and how it affects newcomer communities. We've looked at community-based approaches to mobilizing research findings and applying them to work with newcomers, and at recent work on the relationship between precarious immigration status and health. Those recordings are available on our YouTube channel and the Community Knowledge Program website. Today's panelists will talk about ways to build and sustain successful research partnerships. And the next discussion next month will cover some innovative ways to mobilize research knowledge and make sure it finds its way into practice. Before we get to the speakers, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping notes. Please keep in mind that this webinar is being recorded. The video and the transcript will be available on our website by the end of the month. If you require subtitles, you can enable live transcription by clicking Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen and selecting Show Subtitle. Please note that the chat function is disabled for today's event, but we encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to participate. As soon as we finish the discussion, a short survey will appear on your screen in your browser. We would appreciate it very much if you could stay with us until the end of the event to share your feedback, as we will use it to improve our future programming. We're going to start with some introductions and then our panelists' presentations, and then we'll come back together for questions afterwards. We have three amazing panelists that we will hear from today. First, we'll hear from Paulina Wyrzykowski. Paulina holds a Master of Social Work and a law degree from the University of Toronto. She practiced immigration law in Toronto before moving overseas to serve as Senior Research and Advocacy Officer with Makerere University's Refugee Law Project. Over the past 20 years, Paulina has worked on behalf of refugees and immigrants in Egypt, Canada, and Uganda. Before taking on her current position of Toronto South LIP and Newcomer Services Director at the Neighborhood Group Community Services, Paulina was employed as Manager of Family and Newcomer Programs at West Neighborhood House. Second, we will hear from Sultana Jahangir. Sultana has been a social service worker and social justice advocate for 25 years in Bangladesh, the United States, and Canada. After immigrating to Canada, she lived in Toronto's East Danforth area with a high concentration of low-income immigrant families, mostly Bangladeshi immigrants. Sultana led immigrant women from the area to create their own organization, South Asian Women's Rights Organization, or SAWRO. Since 2007, she has served as SAWRO's executive director. Under her leadership, SAWRO has developed effective programs to reduce community poverty and empower women and girls. Sultana has a master's degree in political and social science from Dhaka University and has enhanced her skills through additional education in the United States and Canada. Recently, Sultana was nominated by Costi Immigrant Services and South Asian Women's Rights Organization to work on a local project called Enhanced Democratic Participation of Immigrant Women, aimed to reach equitable employment access under the Advanced Gender Equality Project funded by Status of Women Canada. Sultana brings significant experience working for women's equality in her community across a wide range of fields. Finally, we will hear from Ruth Wilson. Ruth is a PhD candidate with the Factor N-Wintosh Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto and a former senior researcher at the Center for Community-Based Research. Her work draws on critical race and decolonizing frameworks to support racialized communities, most notably racialized immigrants and refugees, and their efforts to engage in participatory forms of research and community organizing. Her dissertation examines how participatory action research, PAR, is conceptualized and practiced in social work, with a specific focus on the role and value of engaging communities in PAR as a form of community practice. Ruth is also a social worker trained in Freirean approaches to community practice with substantial experience working in the settlement sector as a community health worker. A vital component of her practice includes mobilizing community knowledge to inform program and service development through participatory facilitation. Looking forward to the discussion today, and let's get started with Paulina.
Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Emily. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I was actually quite thrilled to receive the invitation. I often speak on, immigration matters and policy-related matters, and this is a little bit different, and I was very excited because it's something that's close to my heart. I do have a PowerPoint presentation, so if I'm allowed to share, I will start with that now. Here we go. And I'm going to be speaking about sort of my experience with building and sustaining research partnerships. And it's a learning process. It's a learning process for me as well. I've been doing this for a while now, and I find that with every new partnership, there's new challenges and new learnings to be had. So a little bit of background first. I am the director of Toronto South Local Immigration Partnership and Newcomer Services. Local immigration partnerships are federally funded planning bodies that are focused on creating and implementing local settlement strategies to foster collaboration among service providers and to support the creation of a welcoming community. So I would argue that collaboration and partnership building are at the very core of our mandate. Our LIP, for instance, brings together 70 different service providers, and we're only one of 5 in Toronto. So there are 4 other community-based LIPs in Toronto, and there's the Toronto Newcomer Office, which is a municipal LIP. Again, the core of our mandate is to partner with different organizations. And so we regularly partner with community organizations, with research institutions, with municipalities. And together we both create strategic plans, we conduct research, we also implement some projects. All those partnerships have very different levels of formality, duration, and intent. So, there's loose partnerships where people come together as volunteers to accomplish a time-limited project. And we also have very formal partnerships, as with our consortium partners, for instance. So our LIP is actually constituted with 3 organizations: Wood Green Community Services, the Canadian Centre for Victims of Torture, and the Neighborhood Group Community Services, which is the contract holder. And those are very formal partnerships. We also have formal partnerships with Jasper Municipality as part of the national work that we've engaged with. And we have formal partnerships with a few community partners on research projects currently. So it's namely Social Planning Toronto and Department of Imaginary Affairs. So I juggle these partnerships every day of my work life. We are also sort of interestingly located in this space, in the sense that the neighborhood group community services is a large social services provider. We have an annual budget of 65 million. And that means that when we're the lead, often we are the bigger partner, but if we're dealing with a university or municipality, we're the smaller partner. We're sort of positioned in the middle. We're definitely one of the biggest players in the NGO space in Toronto, I believe. So I'm going to start with some partnership essentials. I would say that the basic essential of any good partnership is trust and good faith. And this is something we often say to our funders, that excessive monitoring is not only administratively wasteful, but it assumes bad faith on the part of the partners, and it doesn't make for good partnerships. True partnerships are based on trust, which means that when you see something going wrong, you have to assume that there was an honest error that was made somewhere, either by you or by the other person, and that the objective is to fix it, not to lay blame or assume that somebody intentionally did something wrong. There are things that foster that trust in general. So fairness and transparency. I often, I have to be very careful not to only argue for my own interests in front of funders, but also to make sure that my partners' interests are represented to funders. I make sure that I power share, meaning that even when it's not required. So for instance, when we're the lead on a contract, often the funders will only want to interact with us because we're the contract agreement holder. And I found that it's important to always go back to the funder and say, actually, this is a partnership and I want my partner to be present at that meeting. And I need to get back to my partner and ask what they think. So often you'll find that if you're the lead on a partnership, the funder will sort of pressure you to act as if you're the only partner that matters, essentially, because from their funding perspective, that's true. And you have to keep going back to them and saying, that's not true. My partners are equal partners in this. Clarity around roles, that's easier said than done. My experience has been that when you're starting up a new project, especially, there's actually quite a bit of fluidity and there's a lot of back and forth. And often these projects are thrown together during very short timelines because you only have 6 weeks to put together a proposal. So what you have is a very broad outline of a project, and then it actually the details have to be worked out once the project is underway. So I think it's worthwhile working towards clarity around roles. It certainly helps with the partnership. I don't think it's realistic to always start out with total clarity. It does help to have regular meetings. It helps with the rapport building as well. I think expectation management is very important, and that's both expectation management for your partners and the communities. I found that especially when we work with community-based partners, it's very important to remember that they're staying in that community, right? And so if they go into this with the expectation that your study is going to revolutionize everything, and that's not actually a realistic expectation, they're going to be disappointed and they're going to feel betrayed. So I think you need to right away from the get-go sort of establish what are reasonable expectations, what you're hoping to achieve, and what you can hope to achieve, given that, often the studies that we do shift over into advocacy, and advocacy is very, very difficult to show impacts of short term. Flexibility, again, you have to, when you work in partnership, you have to sort of accept that things are going to shift and timelines will shift, etc. And time. If ideally you would have the time to develop a good partnership before it even begins. Relationship building is very important. By the time the opportunity comes for you to get money, it's too late to start building that relationship. Ideally, you would have those relationships already based on conversations you've had in your community and with other stakeholders. I'm going to talk first specifically about partnering with smaller organizations. Again, as a large service provider, this is often the case for us. One thing I would say is respect their research expertise, respect their expertise generally. The one example that comes to my mind is when I was working in Uganda, I was working out of Makerere University in their refugee research branch. And we often had visitors from overseas, including from places like Oxford and Cambridge, etc. These were very bright people, and they really wanted to find things out. They were very keenly invested in the research, but they sort of saw the researchers at Makerere as raw material. You know, they wanted the local partners to go out and get the contacts and to bring back the information of what the community was saying. It didn't occur to them that the local partners actually had a great deal of analytical capacity and research capacity and could come to them with legitimate research insights and conclusions. And I think, you know, there were also racial dynamics at play there that I think sometimes repeat here too. I think we have to be very mindful of the fact that just because somebody's not a researcher doesn't mean they don't have research insights or they don't have analytical insights that can help move the research along. You also have to remember that the smaller partner's back office capacity is not your back office capacity. So, you know, you have to be tolerant of certain things like invoices coming in late, the fact that there may not be formal policies around everything, the fact that, you know, they might have turnover, which in turn leads to inconsistent decision-making. They can say yes to something and then 2 months later it can be a no. To some extent, you have to also shield them from the funder in that regard. So you have to be prepared to, you know, not make them look bad in front of the funder, not say, well, the invoices were late again, but to say, you know, it'll get submitted next time, or you know, make sure that they're not sort of injured through your involvement. The same goes with staffing capacity. The staff in smaller organizations can be underpaid and they can be overworked, and that can sort of reflect in the amount of work that they're able to take on. And we need to understand that. And finally, we need to consider that partner's position in the community, because again, you know, often as the bigger player, you're going to do that piece of research and you're going to leave, and the smaller organization is going to stay there. So if the outcome of the research is such that the findings don't match people's intuitions, for instance, or that they discount a perspective that's very valuable to that community, all that backlash is going to turn against that smaller organization that you partnered with. And you have to be very mindful of that. So what happens when you're, again, a middle player and you're partnering with larger organizations, such as universities and municipalities? Well, one thing you have to expect is there's going to be layers of bureaucracy. There's no way around it. It has nothing to do with the immediate program or partner that you have. My experience has been that people are really keen to go for these partnerships, but they have layers and layers of hoops to jump through. So as an example, not only will, you know, they require formal memoranda of understanding, but those memoranda of understanding will go through multiple layers of approvals. They will go through their legal department. There will be edits. There will be comments. It can take months. The second piece is that power has nuance. So I think often we make the assumption that when we partner with something like a municipality, they're just so much more powerful. And they have so many more resources that they can bring to the table. But the reality is that within a municipality or within a university, a particular program can be quite marginalized, and they may not have that power, and they may not even have their own job security. They may be a contract worker who was hired for 6 months to do this piece of research. So I think we have to be respectful of that and not sort of assume that they're coming in with all this privilege when they themselves might not necessarily do so. I think it's important to play to our strengths. I found that nonprofits compared again to municipalities and universities can be more nimble. When you're discussing things like, okay, we need additional staff capacity. Can we hire an additional researcher? Often a municipality won't be able to do that short term. There's just too many, again, layers of approval. There's too many long-term implications. An NGO might be able to do it a lot faster and can be a lot more creative around things like bidding processes and so on. And so I think for that reason, NGOs actually make very good leads if they do have the back office capacity to be an administrative lead. And finally, claim your space as an expert. So researchers come in and they do have specific training in methodology, research methodology, and that training needs to be respected for sure. And I often ask, I respect their expertise. I don't often question our research partners' methodology, for instance, although I do ask, specific questions if something doesn't make sense to me. But I think where we come in as service providers is around the real life implications of the research and sort of the long-term implications. So again, an example of that is often a research piece will come back and it will say, well, here are the service gaps. Nonprofits are not providing services after hours. Unless you are a nonprofit and you're able to say to them, let's delve in, let's unpack that a little bit more. Why aren't they providing those services? Is it because there's no funding? Is it because they're not actually allowed to by the labor standards? Unless that conclusion becomes more nuanced, not only does that undermine the research, the validity of the research, but it could actually be used against the sector. And then those organizations will never want to partner with you again if you've made them look bad to funders, for instance. So it's I think where our input is critical is in being able to contextualize the research. And then finally, some learnings. And again, for me, this is a work in practice. So I'm not going to lie and say that I always get this right. I think my partners have their share of frustration with me and vice versa, but we do have really good partnerships and really strong partnerships. One thing is don't expect collaboration to equal efficiency. I know that sometimes our funders think that it does not. Collaboration slows things down. It means there's multiple decision makers, multiple consultations at play. There's different layers of decision making and much more admin, and you have to be prepared to put in that extra work. That doesn't mean that collaboration is not worth it. It absolutely is worth it because it deepens the research. It makes, again, in the way that I've shown in the previous slide, I think it makes the conclusions, it lends them legitimacy, and it gives researchers access to places they wouldn't have access to otherwise. But let's not pretend like it also makes the research easier. It doesn't. Collaboration slows things down. The second piece is your way might not be the only way. So I keep having to remind myself, for instance, that just because an event was run differently from how I would run it, or a particular survey is phrased differently from how I would phrase it, doesn't make it wrong. You have to sort of respect the expertise of the people that you're partnering with and accept that they might do things differently and it might still be right. Outcomes matter, but so does process. I'm somebody who's very outcomes oriented, and sometimes I tend to run a little bit roughshod over process. Not a great idea with partners, especially. You need to make sure that people feel genuinely consulted and genuinely invested, and not just like you're using them as a rubber stamp on your ideas. Similar to that, you need to be very aware of power and how it shifts. I have found that with long-term partnerships, the power sometimes can shift, right? So for instance, a partner can come in as an equal partner and then somehow, one of the two partners attracts way more funding for similar kinds of work, and suddenly they have more power in the space. It can also be the case that there's staff turnover, and so somebody who's very experienced and held a lot of power leaves, and somebody new comes in and can't quite claim that expert space. It can be very, very nuanced, and you have to be very aware of where the power is going to avoid tensions. And then finally, it's generally not a good idea to try to oversee your partner's work. I go into partnerships with the assumption that all the partners are equal and they're all experts in their own space and they know what they're doing. Now, the reality is that if you're the contract holder, you also have legal responsibilities, right? Like the deliverables, essentially, if you don't fulfill the deliverables, that'll be a mark against your organization. So there are times when you might have to step in and sort of figure out if the partner needs extra support, for instance, on completing their deliverables. And those things do need to be addressed. But I think you need to be mindful that you're not their boss. You are a partner and you're working towards a common goal. So I think with that, I will end. That's the end of my presentation. And again, thank you so much, everybody who's attending. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Paulina. That was very helpful. You touched on a lot of the themes that I hope that we'll be developing over the course of the conversation. The nuance of power is especially important, and I think that is something that we're going to hear a lot about from Sultana and Ruth. So I will turn it over to Sultana now. Thank you, Paulina.
Thank you for giving me a time to talk in here. Thank you also institutions and all of you recognizing community-based organizations. So my name is Sultana Jahangir. I'm working with South Asian women's rights organizations, and we are very close to the community. So we have a trust with the community, and we are a small organization. So I want to explain a little bit about communities' realities and also their lived experience when they came in Canada. So most of the communities, people in our community, that Bangladeshi immigrant community, are very educated. They came as a skilled worker or the spousal skill visa. So they have a kind of intention that their skill and experience already scanned by the Canadian system. They will going to get a job in their reality field. But the problem is in here, when they come in Canada, they find it out that underemployment is in here. They're already impacted by the underemployment. And just underemployment is a two type. One, underemployment, they are not getting job in their related field because there is a requirement for Canadian experience and other things. And another underemployment, they're forced to work in the minimum wage job that is below living expenses. So their living experience is in here that their education is not recognized. They did not get enough support to settle in Canada. And also immediately when they come, all of this livelihood expenses is so high, so it's not possible to meet by the living minimum wage job. So they fall through the poverty. So the underemployment is the root cause of the poverty. Since Soro started the organization, we try to raise this concern and always advocate for the people to find it out what is the solution. We did an investigation in 2016 in our community with 250 people. And that times we raised the concern that underemployment is the root cause of the problem. We raised the concerns that precarious labor market condition, that grinding the people. We raised the concern that how staffing agency ruling the labor market and creating a slavery labor market. We request all these labor, work-related social benefits should have to be equitable way access to by the people. We ask government to look at these things and fix the system. But unfortunately, we find it out that recognition of our, survey and our report is not getting that much, support in the policy level sector. The pandemic hit the ground, and then people realize how important the nonprofit is, small organization, community-based organization, because that is the time we are at the hands of the big organization of the government to support the community to mitigate and contain the pandemic impact. We did a lot of work during the pandemic to support the community, and I really don't want to have that much time to talk in here. So I just want to request everyone, you can go to our website to find it out, Soro's activity during the pandemic. It is www.soro.org. We did a lot of work to support the people to face the reality. And recently we did another investigation after this, starting in October 2021, and it finished in March. And there is 230 people join with us to give us the pandemic impact and living experience. And this is a very, very inhuman condition that people pass during the pandemic. Everyone knows that racialized immigrant women impacted by the pandemic more than everyone in the world. And also, we find it out that their impact, especially the mother and other impact, is very severe. So we try our best to bring the living experience on the table. So we have these books, you can read these things. And we see that all this policy program and practices in the all three-level government are not recognize people's living experience. The people fall through by the service gap, intersectional, experience and barrier are not recognized by the systemic issue. I just give one example about the childcare. That women who are looking for childcare subsidy, there is a policy that you are entitled for childcare subsidy. But as soon as they apply, the government requires them to work 25 to 30 hours. And this is one of the eligibility criteria. But if you are not working right now, how you can meet this criteria? And also, like, this is a lot of people get excluded by this way. And this intersectionality and this, systemic exclusion should have to be recognized. We work with lots of organizations, especially the research community, because we realize that community-based organization cannot alone fix this thing because they don't have any resource, they don't have any power. We really need to make a relationship with power-based people, so like the other organization and also research community. Sol has a very strong relationship with University of Toronto, York University, McMaster University. We did a lot of research together. And we find it out that this way, the community's lived experience could be very easy to reach the stakeholder table, policymaker, and also those who are fixing the system. Because at the end of the day, we need to fix the system. Because we see the inequality in the society, it is coming from systemic inequality. If we are not fixing these things, the distance is going to be increase a lot. And we're going to see that substandards, livelihood, process is not good. We need a Canadian standard life. Everyone deserves these things. So that equality could be established if the non-profit organization like community-based organization, service organization, research community come together to make a relationship together. We have recently completed a project with McMaster University, and that is the work in Little Bangladesh. So they raised the concern that how WSIB cheating the people and how people get excluded from WSIB benefit. We did work with the York University of Toronto to bring the resiliency of the people, that how they survive, how they are collectively work together to defending each other. So everything is working in the ground. Somehow it needs to be connected. And research community is the only solution for non-profit community-based small organization to make a relationship and bring this living experience evidence-based way to the stakeholder and policy table. So that is the advocacy work. We need to do it. And we feel that all of these three levels of this services model, like non-profit organization, and also all the big organization, and also the research institution, they should be collaborated together. I totally agree with Pauline that building the collaboration, building the network is sometimes, you have to follow through lots of policy program and then also ethics and everything. We have a lot of talents for this thing to build the collaboration and relationship with big organizations. But at the end of the day, we need to find it out some model to do these things, because I found it, IRCC do not recognize the small organizations working as a settlement and integration. That is too bad, because unfortunately, non-profit small organization already get the liability to provide settlement services unfunded way. So did these things long time when it established an organization. Until today, lots of non-funded work, we did it in the community, but it's not recognized by the IRCC. We submit funding from the beginning to IRCC to recognize that we can provide the settlement services. But unfortunately, we get rejected every time. That's not good. They have to recognize the capacity and power of the non-profit small organization. Because trust with the communities people that we build it, it's not easy to build by a big organization. So we want them to recognize that us as a hand. If you strong our hand, the community will be strong. It's like whatever the IRCC services provided never go ground. A lot of people get excluded. A lot of people fall through by the crack because the service is not meeting the people's living condition. So we can bring these things, we can modify the services, and we need all to be accepted that whatever the system we have are not working. This system should have to be totally fixed based on the current condition, because if the current condition totally mismatch with the existing system. So IRCC, federal government, provincial government, local government should sit down with the non-profit organization, ask it what kind of system we need it, and give us the authority to be the changing mechanism. Because we don't have any authorized to do these things, because we can bring the experience and share it with all of the organization and depend on their kindness. But that should not be work anymore. Then the change is important right now. Because of the pandemic, it already gives us a lesson that interdependence society is important. And it is important to minimize this inequality. Until doing these things, interdependent society will not going to be established. And we should not wait for another pandemic to come to build a society better than before, because we cannot go back in the before system. Before system is totally rigged. So that things need to be fixed up. So here is the time. We are running out of time also. Here is the opportunity. We can work with together. Wesleyan institutions, Pauline, Ruth, Sultana, we all can work together because we are the community representation. We have the elite experience of the people that they get excluded. We bring lots of frustration from the community. We can submit this to the table. Analyze this thing, find it out what could be the solution. So that solution is important right now. So that is my request and begging to everyone. Let us work together to do these things and we fix it, because we have a system, we have a different body. We need to be work together. And we need to be in the same pace, because end of the day, we need to support the communities, people, those who are the most disadvantaged, most affected by all of this inequality in the society. Until we are not bringing this women group or this immigrant group in a same pace, sustainability will not going to be happening in Canada. End of the day, we want to build a better Canada than before. So that's why we need to work together. And Sorrow and other non-profit organizations who are very underfunded and very lack of resources, working a huge amount of time by the volunteer way to support the community, cannot be sustained without the funding. So, and social justice is not easy. Like, okay, give 3 years funding to organization, they can work social justice. It's not a grocery work. We need a long-term sustainable funding for this small non-profit organization, local organization, and also make a very strong relationship with the other big organization, research community to support the create a vibrant society in Canada. That will be the only solution, and that could be done if we can make a strong bonding each other to support the community. Because end of the times we want to see that the status of the women does not mean a group of women's status. It should be mean all women, those who live in Canada, those who are disadvantaged right now. Distance between certain group of women with other women is very high. That drag down overall participation of the women in the labor market, women in the society. So this is the time to march together. Every sister should have to be increase their hand to support other person to connect it with each other. That's my approach and that's my request. Please raise your hand, give your hand to me so I can hold it and I can bring the community on in the table so we can make a very strong, inclusive society and true equality in the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sultana. You've really touched on some important aspects connecting to what Paulina was saying about power. And I think your unique perspective as someone with lived experience who has been bringing others with lived experience together to get your voices heard is so important. Your plea that we need to work together, that the organizations need the funding and need the capacity to be able to participate in meaningful research that identifies the needs and the actual lived experiences of the community, just crucial. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sultana. And finally, we will hear from Ruth. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Oops. Okay, I just wanted to say hi, everybody. I just wanted to give you a little look at my face before I switch to my slides, and I'm going to share my slides now. Okay, I hope, oops. Sorry about that. I hope everyone can see. Oops, sorry, I'm sorry about this. Sorry about this. I hope everyone can see my slides. So a bit about me. I was very pleased to be invited here today because I've been doing community-based research in different settings, both in community settings, like in projects where the community organization is the lead, and also in university settings. And I've also worked in a place called the Center for Community-Based Research, which is a nonprofit social enterprise doing community-based research that's in service to the sector. So in these three settings, I've been doing CBR for over 16 years now, but my very first project was actually while I was working at Access Alliance, and it was funded by the Wellesley Institute. And it was a project called the Income Security Race and Health Project. And Sultana, I'll let you know that that project looked very deeply into the health impacts of precarious employment on racialized newcomers, particularly in Black Creek. And there are a lot of photos. I thought, because I'm returning back to the place, to the funder that started this journey for me, I thought I would include some of photos from that project in this presentation. Okay, so I want to talk about first, just be very clear about naming what I think is part of the issue. So this presentation combines 16 years of experience, but also, again, my dissertation is dedicated to looking at community-based research as a practice, but very critical, in particularly critical of the community university partnership and what that means. And I just want to name part of the problem, right? So there's this of why we should do community-based research. Like, why does community-based research matter? And it's because there is this ongoing struggle in the sector to fill that gap between theory and practice. And I don't know how many times I've heard people from the sector say, research is not reaching my organization, right? It's not, and also I have so much practice knowledge that's not reaching universities. So theory, research is traveling one way, practice is traveling another way, and they're not strategically aligning. There's lots of reasons for this, but the one I'm most interested in is, is this idea that we've moved to a place in a lot of the settlement sector around evidence-based practice, and where program and develop more and more funders, especially state funders, want programs to demonstrate that this program came out of the best available research. But then at the same time, a lot of new, exciting, creative initiatives need to be legitimized through rigorous evaluation. And this is how the evidence-based paradigm is working out. But the problem is that the evidence-based paradigm is very narrow in what it understands as what is good evidence. And it draws on kind of these data collection methods that are actually very Eurocentric ways of knowing, right? And they're not really offering the full picture of what is working and what is not working. And then, like, within this very narrow scope of understanding and making meaning with community, mostly racialized and indigenous knowledge systems, ways of knowing become delegitimized. And that is contributing to the gap, because there's a huge level of storytelling that is not reaching into program and service development. So CBR's position to fill this gap, it's by making the following promises, right? It has to be community driven, rooted and relevant and respectful of communities. It has to be participatory. So there should be some equitable redistribution of power over the research process, and it should be action oriented. So the process and the findings, going back to what Polina was saying, should raise our critical consciousness and support or feed social change movements. But there's another cornerstone that people don't often talk about, and that's epistemic justice. And this is like an elitist academic word of saying there are multiple ways of making meaning, and we have to open up our imagination around how we produce knowledge and how we do knowledge, so that we engage all the diverse ways of storytelling that's available to the project. And more community-based research projects, especially at the grassroots, are starting to realize this. And this is a definition of participatory research in a very small community-based project with a Somalian community. And for the first time, I see a definition that's actually saying that this framework is rooted both in traditionally recognized knowledge, such as scholarship generated by university-based research, but is also valuing historically delegitimized knowledge generated with marginalized communities, knowledge generated through activism as well, and social movements. And so at the middle, and this is where this is where our conversation today starts, is there is CBR is relational. So so much about it is about maintaining good, productive, honest, genuine, authentic relationships. But there is another promise that I do want to talk about before I go into the rest of it, and to say that there is a bigger promise that CBR makes, and that it's going to shift the power and equities in knowledge production as a whole, and not just project in any particular project. So who gets to do research and on what? And the theory is that if by opening up the research process to include multiple people from different walks of life and different stakeholders, that over time, this idea of researching with a community can eventually shift power in knowledge production, so that more and more research can be done by the community, more resources and capacity can be built in the sector for sectors to research for themselves. And this is crucial because it's about reversing the gaze of research, right? So it's not just universities looking down researching on populations, but it's communities looking up and researching systems. And then hopefully, with the support and the guidance of Indigenous research methodologies and Indigenous communities, we are moving past this continuum into more decolonizing research. But we all know that there's also a gap between theory and practice in participatory research. So even when a research looks really good on paper, I hear all the time community members saying, yeah, it looked good. They did a lot of, on the surface, on paper, it looks very good. In the report, it's a very great story, but it didn't feel good being part of the project. And at times I felt often dismissed. There were quite a bit of tensions. I didn't think my position was being valued. The process wasn't accessible to me. So there's also a gap in theory and practice in community-based research. So if there is a gap in that research, that is only contributing to or not doing the job of filling the gap in theory and practice. So I think some lessons from my research and experience I want to throw out there is to say that we can't assume CBR is naturally a socially just way of doing research. It takes so much work and attention to how just small micro and macro aggressions are unfolding in the process, for example. And that this continuum of research should probably actually be reimagined as a slippery slope, because most projects start with academics in particular, start with very good intentions of doing the best research, authentic research that really opens the doors to research to community, and everybody wants that. I think most researchers who do community-based research want that. But because it's located in kind of the neoliberal structures of the university, researchers constantly find themselves making compromises on these principles of research, on the principles I shared with you, on the promises. And slowly, as these promises happen, the promises, we pull back on the promises that we make through this model, we slip down, and there is this potential that participatory research can become a very exploitive experience. And there are some of the structural issues is that restrictive exclusionary funding structures. Most big money research is only filtered through universities. I have worked in community-based organizations to try to be creative around funding, but we cannot keep up with knowledge production that's happening at the research level because academics are the gateway to big research budgets. Academics face a lot of publishing and pressure around peer-reviewed process that's really rooted in colonial thinking and kind of that Eurocentric way valuing and ranking how knowledge is made. But under that pressure to publish, it takes away a lot of time and energy from treating communities with care in a research project. I think for me, the biggest issue is this the redistribution of power over research is actually right now in the community-based model is limited to the research process. And it's not really changing the system of knowledge production that protects this, that makes this process so rigid in so many ways. And so and universities, of course, are the gatekeeping. Paulina mentioned power hoarding. Like these are issues that a lot of academics and community face. And both within projects and within universities, there's no community accountability structure where a community can hold a project beyond the team members that are there accountable for the kind of research they're producing and the kind of process they're engaging in. Some other tensions I want to talk about is there are kind of competing clocks and what we call temporalities. So a lot of times community organizations are operating under a tempo of urgency. Funders, the fiscal year end is coming up. Funders have short turnaround times around program development. There are community needs, there are news cycles. They have to be very reactionary to crisis that's happening in communities. And so these things require immediate reaction and short-term action. But normally the university structure is driven by this long-term big picture change that requires deeper and therefore longer engagements. But then they'll come drop in on you at very times to say, oh, we have to write a proposal very, very fast, and then drop out. And there's this huge gap while the proposal they've submitted is being evaluated. And so these kind of tempos, these kind of conflicting temporalities can create a lot of tension. And there needs to be effort around how these tempos can work for each other. The other thing I want to talk about is mutual benefit versus in service. So the biggest kind of a lot of community-based research are thought through this, are planned and thought through and proposed through this lens of mutual benefits. But it's very rare to see a project that benefits everyone equally and that meets their expectations. And in my data, like projects that have a high benefit community partners tend to be less beneficial for academic researchers professionally because they have less time to kind of meet the rigor and the standards of the university that the university imposes on them. And then vice versa, the ones that are really super successful for academics tend to be less beneficial for community because academics have done it in a way that prioritize their own professional needs. And this, so there is a lot of calls around restructuring universities to create space for research that is solely in service to communities, where where careerism is not part of the conversation. And I do think that's a way of restructuring universities that might be useful to communities. I think the last point I want to make here is that everyone is tired, everyone is stressed, and to recognize that your partners that are in the sector are taking on, who take on research projects are doing it outside of their job description or extending their roles to engage in research. But at the same time, academic researchers are extending their roles as educators and researchers to try to really build in some community mobilizing skills and be more present for community. And in that context, everyone is feeling very stretched and tired. But I do want to point to, and my research certainly suggests this, is that CBR can be, I'm saying a social work intervention here, but I probably should, it should be thought of as a settlement intervention as well. And that there is this potential for healing and wellness for CBR. At Access Alliance, one of the things I learned was that the research was important, but the transformative experience of engaging communities in research was also very important. So this is going back to both what Sultana and Paulina were saying about the process, because there's something in the process that raises the critical consciousness. And there's lots of research out there that this idea of being able to see and navigate and unpack your own personal experiences together and in light of and looking at the structures that shape them can have a lot of healing power. And this comes from a lot of work done in liberation psychology. So here are some strategies that are kind of overlap with what's already been said that I have seen work and I have used over the years to try to create good relationships, to avoid those compromises. And one is, as Paulina said, is building trust and earning partnerships. And so before research partnership drops, instead of dropping in a community with your proposal and idea in hand, there should be like years of work being put towards building a presence in that community. So joining protests, attending community events. At Access Alliance for the Income Security Project, we spent a huge amount of time organizing agenda setting events, right? Where we would go into the community and ask, what do you want to research? There's a lot of participating in partnership tables, advocacy networks. I find that bringing your research interest into kind of existing arts-based programming is very good. So joining with local artists and the creative arts movements happening in different communities to make research more accessible and enjoyable. But at the end of the day, it's about being with community outside of the interest of your own project. The other is whenever possible, I do try to build in employment opportunities for community members who could use an employment opportunity. And especially in the racialized immigrant and refugee communities, there are so many deprofessionalized folks there that have the skills and training to do really great rigorous research, but are underemployed, looking for opportunities. And when you have peer researchers, to be sure that you're going in it with a co-learning framework and not just, we are training you on research, we're building your capacity in research, because the whole process should be about co-learning. And to say that outreach for research participants is a shared responsibility. Often that is the idea of gathering and recruiting participants is usually just falls on community members, community partners, but that actually should be considered a shared responsibility. So should data collection. So I do think community members should experience it if they have the capacity. And most importantly to me is that partners and community peer researchers need to should experience data analysis at some level, because that's when raw data gets transformed into narratives and stories that are presented through the project. And this really leverages community peer researchers, community partners to be co-presenters and co-authors in all of the work. The last thing, I have two more things, and just to say, and I'm over time, I'm sorry. So just very fast is to think about using popular education, both as a data collection tool, and here you see a picture of body mapping, and as an internal mobilization strategy, where you use popular education, adult education curricula to make sure that knowledge is traveling in two ways, in different directions all throughout the process. And then last thing, I would want to really recommend folks in building a community accountability structure to make sure that theory and practice is moving in the right direction. And I'm talking about bringing at different stages in the research project, hosting community dinners, hosting community roundtables to talk about where you're at in the project and some initial learnings, to physically close the distance between communities and universities in general. So universities should be, when they can, in community settings doing research, and vice versa. Community needs presence and space on universities. And the last is to say that I think universities more often in departments should have some sort of community-based advisory committee to help oversee and start agenda setting in research. And that's where I'll stop. And I'm sorry for taking too much time. Oops. And I can stop sharing. My apologies for taking too much time.
Well, Ruth, you've talked about a lot of really important theoretical underpinnings, I think, of the ways that research partnerships are formed and the ways that organizations can build relationships with each other over time. I'm specifically thinking about your point that research with a community can eventually grow into research by a community. And I think this ties very neatly to what Sultana was saying about how the expertise lies within communities. And the lived experience needs to inform policy. It needs to inform the ways that other groups interact with the communities that have all this knowledge and need to share it. Yes, yeah. Thank you, Ruth. Very informative presentation. And I see that Sultana and Paulina both have their hands up. So let's open up the discussion for everybody. And Paulina, I think I saw yours first. So we'll start with you and then go to Sultana and then
It was actually Sultana who was first.
Oh, Sultana first. So let's go with Sultana first and then Paulina. And if everyone who's watching, if you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A. Yeah, so Sultana, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just want to apologize because when I speak, I just said that the racialized women are the most impacted in the world. It's not like it's a racialized immigrant women most impacted in the Canadian, sector in women group. I just see that polling and saying these things that how there is like a model and also like CBR community-based resource has the barrier and also present that what could be done. We have experience with the CBR. We find it out that totally agree with Ruth. The funding is not equal distributed. And one thing is in here that they bring their own idea. They really want us to fit with their puzzle. So like that is the problem because all of this is very funding driven. The funder, first put the announce the proposal based on one theme. We might not be matched with the community. The community organization to totally change their shape to match with this theme. Otherwise, you cannot submit a funding proposal. You will be disqualified. So these are the things like funder and each government should have to come to the community, ask what do you want, what kind of problem you're facing. Then do it, from the bottom up approach to then prepare the funding proposal. They never come to us and ask like what kind of funding the community-based organization, our community needed, what kind of change we needed. So but they're just starting the funding proposal based on their own intention. And also like, the distribution of the resource in the society, in the nonprofit organization sector are not equal. Always the community-based organization, it looks like that they have to, like their entitlement to do lots of volunteer work only to support the community. And their work is not recognized because they feel it's not professionalized. But how it could be professionalized? What is the definition of professional work? That we need to change our shape because when you support a woman, you have to come, extended hour. So sort of work in the weekend and the evening time. But if the funder and other bodies require us to work only this 9 to 5 in a structural way, then it's not possible. So there is a lot of things need to be changed, but it could be doable if they understand each other. It's not like, okay, we cannot do it. We can do it. But it needs some kind of initiative and understanding how we can work together to do the equal distribution of the resources. Thank you.
Sultana, those are excellent points, very much connecting with what Ruth was saying about the funding and who controls it and how funding can be the main gatekeeping. Yeah, okay, thank you. And Paulina.
Thank you, Ruth. First of all, I thought your presentation was brilliant. I would actually love a copy of it if you're willing to share. I also have something to say about the extractive nature of the research, which I think Sultana was touching on. So, you went through sort of the ways in which that can be minimized by including people in the research and helping them develop a sort of broader consciousness around research and so on. And I kept thinking, why not just pay them? So for instance, we, at TSLIP, we now have a policy that we don't engage meaningfully with newcomers unless we compensate them. And we've actually renamed them lived experience experts on the basis that if we were going to bring in a speaker on any other topic, we would pay them. So why would we not pay a newcomer or a member of the community? And so we now have honoraria for all of our participants, including research participants. Now, I realize there's sometimes budget limitations. I realize that sometimes, the level of engagement matters. If you're sending a 5-minute survey, it may not be the same level of engagement, but we do try to make sure that both our partners and the community members are compensated in some fashion. And for me, that goes back to the expectation management, so that at least I can say to the community, look, I can't promise you this is going to revolutionize academia. Okay, I can't promise you it's going to change the system, but at least you're not wasting your time completely. And we value your time and expertise. And to show you that we value it, here's the honorarium.
That's a very clear indication that you are valuing someone. Yes. And this, I think, also touches on the issues of power imbalances. If you are not bringing anything to the community, then why would the community be interested in talking to you? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Ruth.
Yeah, I just kind of want to agree with you that I think in past projects at Access Alliance, when we were doing research, as in a lot of community-based research, there's a much more power over the budget when you're not actually going through funding that comes from universities, because you can use that money to create meaningful employment as much as you can for peer researchers. I think, or community partners, right? Just like sharing the budget more equitably with community partners. In universities, the way the funding structure works is that SSHRC, which is one of the big funders that I deal with, for example, will require a certain, and there are reasons for this, but we're put a lot of limits on how budgets can be spent, where a lot of the salary budget has to go to students and student learning. I find that a lot of academic researchers have to get super creative around making sure there is financial compensation for partners. And SSHRC has shown some flexibility in recent years to do that, but it's been such slow change. And the bureaucracy of finance in universities are just this other whole barrier.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. And what you were saying in your presentation, Ruth, about the competing clocks is a theme that I have heard before as well. When we did our needs assessment in 2021, this was something that came up. The funding cycles for the universities really don't match what the funding cycles for the organizations are, and the research findings that might come out of universities is very difficult to use them in the applications for government funding for the agencies. Okay, thank you. And Sultana, and then we do have a question from the audience. So after we hear from you, Sultana, I'll ask. Thanks.
I have just one concern in here, because when we do any kind of investigation and need assessment in the community as a community-based organization, we bring a huge amount of data, but every time when we try to present this data, we find it out that not that many recognition, because everyone feel it like that only the academic data is the valid data and other data is not validated in that much. And that is the things like, okay, when we are submitting any funding proposal or something, it does not recognize that we should one academic person or one researcher person with us when we do the investigation. That time they let us do the investigation and need assessment by our own way. But when we bring the need assessment data and everything, every time it's a question that is this data is, really get a kind of value in the stakeholder table. Because we find it out that we did investigation in the community, we bring the data, but if we are not giving us a fund to connect it with the research community to validate the data and validate the process that we are doing, and helping us to make it more professional way. But end of the times, that the data that we bring in the table, it shows that it's not doesn't have any value. So this is kind of lack of recognition and a lack of, support the community-based work, because we end of the times we really need a social change, real change. But we don't want any game that every time you go for research and something, a lot of research is done, and a lot of research report is already in here. Yeah, we need more investigation in the community to find it out how we can reform the policy program and practices. But end of the day, if we bring something and it is not getting any kind of change, then the work is very bad, because every time we go to the community, we get so frustrated. How many times I have to tell about my concern? How many times you are coming to us? But where is the change? Because we feel that influence to the changing policymaker is more important right now, because giving them the influence them to change it based on the evidence that we bring it right now, because we need to face the community, hold it our accountability over there. That okay, we take this data from them, where after submission that data, what is going on?
Right.
So this is the frustration in the community when we do any kind of research. And another thing is like when the research based things is that happen, Pauline and everyone says that they give some kind of honorarium, $50, $25 honorarium. But this is like kind of like very hard to, like when people give it to them some receipt or something. Like when we do research or something, we find it out that everything has to be like, you cannot pay cash, you do not do these things, and the money is very low. The $55 to someone to buy, you sit down with them, and I don't know. I feel it like we need to get a good mechanism to recognize people's, like when they sit with you, like how you can compensate that time. Like that person thinks like, okay, after you giving her $50, and after that, she came back to you and said, okay, you took my story, like what is the change made? That place we do not have any answer. So like they feel it like, okay, you give me $50, that as it means that I'm not going to come back to you to ask you that what is going on, what kind of change you make it, where is my information going? And this is the things need to be identified, how we can make some kind of process that every research after the research, we need to come back to the community and tell them that here is the change done based on your information.
That's a very powerful question, Sultana. That's going to stick with me. You took my story, where is the change made? I think at the heart of so much of research, maybe all of research, is storytelling, as Ruth mentioned repeatedly. And there's a writer, Thomas King, involved with Indigenous communities. He's written a lot about Indigenous issues. And he has said, the truth about stories is that that's all we are. And the stories are very powerful. And Sultana, your point about people taking stories and not doing anything with them, or not being seen to doing anything with them, can lead to a lot of frustration among communities, among participants, even among researchers. Yeah, very important point. Thank you. Thank you. And the question that we have from the audience, asking about whether there are any examples of CBR organizations that are entirely divorced from academia in Ontario or in Canada. Maybe something that was started by a non-academic community member, embraced by community members, reports to community members, directed by them, and maybe even raising funds from that same community. One that I'm aware of, because disclaimer, I'm on the board, the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, started in 1975, has done a lot of research over the years. It is community-based, and I'll open it up if others of you have heard of such organizations. Paulina?
I mean, I wanted to suggest Social Planning Toronto, which of course it's an NGO, but it's also a research organization, entirely community-based, not permanently affiliated with a university, and they do excellent research.
Yeah, I can
Great.
also mention the Center for Community-Based Research was before pre-pandemic was located in Waterloo, but is now virtual and doing community-based research across the organization. They're a social enterprise, so they do community-based research through an RFP structure. But I think what's more is, are there just kind of to touch on Sultana's point as well as there are CBR organizations divorced of academia. I think for me, are there CBR funders divorced from state and academia is my question, right? And like that for me, that is a more kind of innovative, creative space. And this is why I think I want to acknowledge Wellesley Institute, because I said I had a very long-term project that was funded through the Wellesley Institute. It was a very flexible funder that understood CBR and can allow us to make very creative choices. Those kind of funders, I think, are super important. But then there is this one issue that if you don't do academia with research with a community, if you don't do research with an academic as a community, a lot of time that research is delegitimized in other ways by the state in particular. Right. So a lot of like knowledge mobilizes in academia through peer publications and then like hoity-toity conversations with high members of state, right? And the community base gets circulated and sometimes even hits media, but it's never kind of embraced as rigorous knowledge in the same way that academic research is.
Yeah,
And so my point to say, Sultana, that's a part of the reason, not all of the reason, but part of the reason why there's so much research happening in community that actually doesn't make it to change, because along the way it gets delegitimized.
Crucial point. Thank you, Ruth. Yeah, Paulina.
I mean, I just wanted to add that there's sort of there's two sides to the question of sort of how can we make community-based research sort of gain more prominence or hold more space or be seen as more legitimate. So I think we need to work on it from two ends, right? One is we do need to sort of undermine the colonial structures that we work within that privilege certain types of knowledge over others. I also do think that, community-based organizations could use some fluency around research language and research methodology. I think that would really be helpful. Not just in order to be able to sort of imbue their own research with some of that, but also to be able to critique some of the academic research, because I have seen, I've seen many academic studies where I would look at the methodology section and think, okay, this isn't a great idea for these reasons. I have the research background to do that. I think most people don't. And so they would look at those results and think, okay, these are legitimate, and not recognize that there are methodological problems all along. I think community members should be able to do that to some extent.
We have been trying to address that through a program that's part of the Community Knowledge Program. We are offering a free online course for research, people working at frontline agencies who are interested in participating in research. So we're in our second cohort of that course right now. We will be opening it again probably in April. And this is something that frontline workers can do to build their own familiarity with the language and some of the basic concepts of research. But I completely agree. There is so much work that needs to be done in this area. And I think that could be a large part of the reason why mainstream funders and the state don't really take this research very seriously. Yeah, okay, thank you. Sultana, and then we have another question from the audience.
Yeah, I just want to bring one thing in here. One is like the community-based organization are doing the investigation, community investigation, the need assessment. And the research and investigation is different. So like when you do the investigation, you just bring a lots of raw information, and that is not formalized by the kind of research or something. So like sometimes you find it out when you do the investigation in the community, such as when we have a pandemic, impact, we just want to investigate how people get impacted. Like we set up a sets of questionnaire and we did this investigation. We bring this impact, living experience of the people. But when we try to formalize these things, we try to use some sort of, own way to formalize. So, and we find it out that definitely the methodology to formalize this information cannot align with the research, group methodology, because the research group is always working with a very small proportion of data, and they have more deep political process or something to find it out, and their coding is different. But when we do an investigation in the community, we took a big chunk of people's information. So like, and then when we try to, formalize these things and try to extract the information, we do our way. But whose one is the most severe? Bring this in the top, not like generalize the data. Because most of the times you take interview 10 people, and when you generalize the data, you find it that most severe information get, fall down through the crack. So, but the investigation we do in the community, we try to find it that who are the most disadvantaged, who are the most impacted, what is the most impacted living experience that we want to bring on top. So that times like generalization is not possible. But we find it out that our methodology is not getting recognized by the research group because they do a kind of, democratic common way that all the data is coming, then you bring, how many times you find it out, people talk about the employer, how many times they find it out. So that way they coded it. They generalize the information. Yeah, they bring some living story on the top, but this way we find it out, some of the data get missing. The intersectionality of the people's experience in each day with the system, and each day their life. When we generalize these things, it get buried by the lots of data. So like that is the challenge we face sometimes. That when we try to bring in the most intersectionality experience of the people, so then we find it out when we try to use the methodology of the research, you find it out that get totally excluded.
Right.
So that things need to be take a little bit recognition that how we can bring more intensive, unique kind of experience more on the table, so then we can feel it that where should the change should have to be made.
Bringing a very different focus.
Yeah.
A tighter focus on a very specific population whose experiences you want
Yeah.
to. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Important point. We have a couple of questions from Alicia in the audience. The first is, how can we take the valuable findings, the service models and so forth being generated by the community-based organizations in the partnerships with the mainstream service providers and the academic partners to a larger scale? So many of these projects are pilots, but once the funding runs out, the knowledge that comes from them doesn't go anywhere and the projects are not sustained. And her follow-up question, at the end of the day, the governments are only providing small-scale Band-Aid solutions to the issues of integration and settlement, employment, housing, healthcare. We're hearing all about all this on the news every day. Meanwhile, there's real solutions that are being developed and they're ready for implementation at a large scale. How can we hold the policymakers and the people who hold this power accountable for implementing these large-scale solutions? Yeah, Paulina.
So I wanted to answer the first part of that question around, which I think really is around knowledge mobilization and sort of knowing what's already been done and sharing that information and sharing that data. I mean, I think that a good place, this goes back to the question of what is the study for, right? What is the purpose of it? Because I think that my experience has been that quite often, if researchers are doing it as part of their PhDs, then, and Ruth, you touched on this, I mean, the primary goal for them is publication in an academic journal, right? And then disseminating that data in the community is secondary if it's there at all. And then if it's a community-based project that's funded through one of the major funders, often the funder has a stake in finding out the outcomes of that study, but doesn't necessarily disseminate it. So unless the community organization takes it upon themselves to share those results, and sometimes the funder actually prevents them from doing that, which is frustrating, but it's sort of upon the organization to share the results. And I completely agree that we need a more comprehensive way of figuring out what's out there already. It's not that those ways don't exist. There are multiple repositories around different issues where that data is uploaded, but there isn't sort of a consistent updating, making sure the links work, making sure everything's there. I don't know of many positions that are sort of focused on making sure that the community has access to the most current data on a particular subject.
That's something that I've seen too. There are many different data repositories, and they're open and available, but they can be hard to navigate or people don't know about them. Yeah, excellent point. Thank you. Sultana and then Ruth, please.
Things Ruth should go before me, then after I'll come, because I need to hear Ruth, then I'm going to talk.
Great. Okay, Ruth.
I was just going to say that I think in terms of there are really, to reflect back, there are super good programs that are happening, and it's not reaching. So this is when like knowledge is produced through practice, and it's not reaching universities. And I think this is why I'm very interested in understanding what a shift. So universities like have a moral and ethical obligation to give back to the communities that they're in, right? And that's historically what they were for, right? To local developments, have local impact. And I think by bringing in like flexible funding to researchers so they can do small community-based in-service projects. In particular, I would like to see universities in my field, social work, to be more engaged with communities doing evaluation of programs, so that and then taking those evaluations and understanding what collective impact looks like when 4 or 5 or those organizations do it. And organizations want this. They want more evaluation of their programs because they want to know what's working with some level of rigor, so that they can justify and reclaim it with funders, right? But in the way universities are structured now, evaluation is not publishable for many ways because it doesn't have to be covered by ethics. There's just not a lot of value given to this very important service universities can be giving to community to help mobilize practice knowledge at a greater scale.
Very important point. And what Ruth, what you were saying, just briefly before I bring in Sultana, I wanted to mention a bit of research that I was involved with through the Gambling Research Exchange Ontario. They had a program, I don't know if it's still active, but called Bet 15K, and they would give $15,000 to a community organization to run a very small scale research project looking at a specific research topic. And it was a really innovative method. It did not involve any universities. I worked with Costi and did all the research with them. And I think this is these kind of innovative funding approaches are definitely something to consider. I've heard a lot about flexibility of funding today. Yeah, thank you. And Sultana.
I just want to answer one thing that Alicia said, that, they use the Band-Aid to solve the temporary and how we can make accountable to the, all level of government to make a larger the solution based on the community's need, like such as housing. But look at this, housing is a national issue. Everyone know that housing, we are very underfunded about the housing, and we did research and we did investigation in the community, and we find it out only the social house is the solution. But we find it that the government give $500 to each of the people, one time to kind of a small Band-Aid. But on the larger scale, they fund the for-profit body to do the housing solution by build a more realtor business and investing in the for-profit sector who said that affordable house, they can build it. But this is not the solution. The main solution to build more social house, how to make accountable to the government, all three level of government, said that, okay, we can invest more in the social house. How we can make this government body more accountable. Sorry, I have a machine is running. Sorry, the sound is very not good.
Okay, thanks. Well, we're nearly at the end of our time. So I just wanted to bring some of the themes together that we've been hearing about today. With the research partnerships, I think a lot of the points that everyone has made about whose knowledge is valued and how that knowledge is sought by people who are in power has a huge impact on how this knowledge is put into practice to improve the lives of newcomers to Canada, because that is the goal of, I think, everyone who is here on this webinar today, is how do we use research to improve the migration, settlement, and integration experiences of people who have chosen to make Canada home. So with the partnerships, we're hearing a lot about the need for understanding power, for considering how it can change and shift over time, how to ensure that the stories and the lived experiences from the communities are heard and have an impact on the policies that affect these communities. A point I'd like to come back to is about how researching with a community can foster research by the community. I think that's a very important point. The communities have the knowledge in them. It is up to the academic researchers to respect and draw on that knowledge, and talking about co-learning instead of teaching. Anyone who has worked in frontline settlement work and who has worked with newcomers to Canada knows that these folks have tremendous knowledge, they have tremendous lived experience, they absolutely deserve respect, and their voices are valuable. And when we lift up the most marginalized people in a community, conditions become better for everyone. So I hope that we will all take from this webinar some ideas for thinking about how these partnerships can work, how we can build them, how we can sustain them, and how we can get the knowledge out into the communities. The topic of our next webinar will in fact be innovative approaches to research mobilization, and that will be in March. I would like to extend my very sincerest thanks to Ruth Wilson, Sultana Jahangir, and Paulina Wierzchowski for their expert knowledge and insights today. And thank you also to my colleagues here at Wellesley Institute, Colleen McDonald, our communications officer, and Maureen Tolentino, who has been providing some support behind the scenes. Thank you again for a fascinating discussion, and I look forward to hearing more about your work. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you everyone who has joined us.